We'll announce, because people have asked, we're expecting a series of votes between 1:30 and 2 o'clock. And so we're going to start with testimony from the second panel, and then we'll break when we go for votes so that if people need to use the restroom or grab a quick bite, they can do that. And then we'll reconvene 15 minutes after the vote ends. So I'd now like to introduce our second panel. I don't know where Mr. GELERNT is. He's on his way. Mr. Lee GELERNT, who's the Deputy Director of the Immigrants' Rights Project of the American Civil Liberties Union, will be joining us. Ms. Jennifer PODKUL, who's the Senior Director of Policy and Advocacy of Kids in Need of Defense. Welcome, Mr. GELERNT. Dr. Julie LINTON, who is the co-chair of Immigrant Health Special Interest Group of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Dr. CRISTINA MUNIZ de la PENA, who is the Terra Firma Mental Health Director of the Center for Child Health and Resiliency, who's here on behalf of the American Psychological Society. Dr. Jack SHONKOFF, Professor of Child Health and Development and Professor of Pediatrics of Harvard Medical School, and Ms. DONA ABBOTT, the Vice President of Refugee and Immigrant Services of Bethany Christian Service. Ms. ABBOTT, I'm sorry we don't have a name tag yet for you, but we are printing one off. This is the glitches when you have your first committee hearing of the year. I know all the witnesses are aware we're holding an investigative hearing, and when doing so, we have the practice of taking testimony under oath. Does anyone have any objections to testifying under oath? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have responded no. The chair advises you then that under the rules of the House and rules of the committee, you are entitled to be accompanied by counsel. Do you desire to be accompanied by counsel during your testimony today? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have responded no. If you would, then please rise and raise your right hand so that you may be sworn in. Do you swear that the testimony that you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have responded affirmatively, and you are now under oath and subject to the penalty set forth in Title 18, Section 1001 of the Criminal Code. The chair will now recognize the witnesses for a 5-minute summary of their written statement. There's a microphone and series of lights in front of you. It turns yellow when you have a minute left and red to indicate your time has come to an end. Mr. GELERNT, you are now recognized for 5 minutes, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Chair Deget, Ranking Member Guthrie, and the rest of the members. I apologize I was late. I am the lead ACLU lawyer in the family separation lawsuit. So I'm going to talk a little bit from that background, talk a little about the lawsuit, where we are, what I think needs to happen. I've been working at the ACLU for more than 25 years doing civil rights work in the immigration area. And I feel confident in saying that the family separation practice is the worst thing I have seen in my 25 plus years. No other administration has done anything like this family separation policy. I think the prior panel made it clear that it was very limited in the past. It was for cause. It was not this widespread systemic family separation. And I think worse still, family separations are still occurring. And as the prior panel mentioned, we filed our lawsuit in March of 2018, and this is before zero tolerance policy. And at that point, we alleged, based on talking to lots of people over the country, that there were hundreds of separations. By the time I stood up in court in the beginning of May, the media had reported roughly 700 separations. I think it now is clear that there may have been many more, but this is even before zero tolerance policy. And when the court ruled on June 26th, the government reported that there were 2,700 separations. Those 2,700 are not obviously the whole story, as this committee has talked about previously with the prior panel. The government's response now to the HHS report doesn't dispute that there may have been thousands more kids separated and released from ORR before the June 26th date of the court's order. What I find remarkable is that HHS is saying it may not be worthwhile and just too hard to actually try and find where all these children are and where the parents are. And that it's remarkable that HHS is saying it may be in the child's best interest not to do so. And Commander White mentioned that it would not be great for ICE to now be showing up at all these children's houses. And I'd like to talk about this more, hopefully during the questions, but we see no reason why that would have to be how it would be done. The information could be provided to social workers, to us, just as it has in the past, and we could find out what the family wants to do. But to say in the United States it's not worth finding children the government separated seems to us to be an untenable position. At a minimum, I think we need to find out the full scope of the problem. And I think that the government really needs to participate in that process. I think one of the things that the committee knows is that there were roughly 400 parents that we know of who were deported without their kids. And at one point, the government stood up in court and said, well, if the ACLU wants to find those parents, let them find them. And ultimately, Judge Sabraw put his foot down and said, no, the government has to help the ACLU. But I think going forward, that's a lot of time and resources. We're happy to do it, but we certainly need the participation of HHS to help us and for the rest of the agencies. Let me just sort of conclude by stating 5 points that I think are critical going forward. Excuse me. First, as I said, we think the committee should ensure that HHS accounts for these thousands of kids talked about in the report to see how many there are, where they are, and what needs to happen. The second point is we think it's critical going forward that there be proper procedures put in place and proper processes going forward so separations do not occur based solely on a unilateral determination by an untrained CBP officer at the border. Third, in the extremely limited situation where separations do occur going forward, it's absolutely critical, as the prior panel pointed out, to have an integrated database that allows tracking quickly. I think Judge Sabraw was shocked, truthfully, that how bad the tracking system was. He called the separations brutal and offensive, but then on top of that, he said he was really startled by the lack of any kind of tracking system. And I don't think one is in place at this point. Fourth, there were many parents deported without their children who were misled or coerced into giving up their own asylum rights. We believe that those parents, if they have legitimate asylum claims and were coerced or misled into leaving without their children, ought to be given a fair opportunity to have an asylum hearing. I mean, some of those parents got on the plane, were told their children will be on the plane with them, only to have the plane take off, and now they're stuck in Central America and their children are here. Finally, we believe strongly that funds should be allocated for the families that were separated to assist them with obtaining medical and other types of assistance. As was pointed out in the prior panel, and I think is going to be strongly reinforced by the doctors on the panel, these children are suffering real trauma and harm, and they need assistance. As just conclude by saying, as when I met with one of our plaintiffs and the mother who had a 4 and 10-year-old child taken from her for months, when she said when they came back was, the 4-year-old still asks her, are they going to come and take me away again in the middle of the night? And I think that's what's going on with these children. Any sense of, stability has been shattered, and without real medical assistance, I think it's going to be very difficult for them to recover. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. GELERNT. Ms. PODKUL.
Thank you, Chairwoman DeGette, Ranking Member Guthrie, and members of the subcommittee. I'm very grateful for your invitation today. I'm here to represent Kids in Need of Defense, a national organization dedicated to promoting the rights of child migrants and ensuring every child has access to high-quality legal representation. Traditionally, KIND has only represented children who arrive in the United States unaccompanied, meaning without a parent or legal guardian. However, last summer, during the family separation crisis, we expanded our services to serve the separated children and families. The majority of children that we serve come from El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. These children have fled their countries out of a desperate need for protection. Extreme violence and threats to their lives and safety leave them with no choice but to flee. Children are telling us that they're embarking on what they know will be a dangerous journey. As one 11-year-old told me, who I interviewed, he said, "If I stayed in my country, I would die. If I took the journey, I might die. So I had to take the chance." Because of these levels of fear and desperation, any policies designed to deter future asylum seekers from asking protection will be unsuccessful. You can't deter away a refugee crisis. Unfortunately, what we saw this administration do last summer was an attempt at deterrence, but in the most cruel way imaginable. Once the systematic separations began taking place, KIND sent emergency teams of lawyers to serve these families. Their stories were heartbreaking. There was an 8-year-old boy who was separated from his father, and he was put on an airplane to an ORR facility over 2,000 miles away. The DHS officer told him he would see his father when he got there. That was not true. There was a 7-year-old who was highly traumatized by being separated from her father, and when the KIND attorneys went to go meet with her in the shelter, they could not even begin to discuss her legal case. She couldn't even answer questions. She was just sobbing during that entire meeting. There was a mother who was separated from all 4 of her children, and when she was finally waiting the return of her youngest, she was given the wrong baby. Our attorneys heard several hundreds of these kinds of stories. We were serving younger children than we had ever before. As attorneys, we're obligated to represent a client's express wishes, yet some of these children couldn't even talk. While some of the children have legal claims that are distinct from their parents, many children's cases are dependent on their parents' claim. But because there was no system in place to track the separated children and their parents, our attorneys didn't even know which children had been separated, let alone how to find the parents. We must demand accountability for what happened last summer, but we must also focus on the separations that are continuing to take place and address the systematic shortcomings that are still harming children. Although the law allows DHS to separate a child from their parent if there's ever a risk to the child's safety, there are no standards for how that decision should be made. In order to reduce unnecessary traumas, we need to have answers to these 6 questions. 1, who is doing the screening to evaluate the rare instance in which a child should be separated? 2, what specialized training does that screener have to make a decision with such grave consequences? 3, what standards are they using to make that decision? 4, who reviews that decision? 5, how can the decision be challenged if there's a concern that the separation was not necessary? And 6, what tracking systems are in place to ensure communication and future reunification in the event that a separation must occur? We need answers to these questions immediately. Congress gave the care and custody of unaccompanied children to Health and Human Services because of their expertise in child welfare issues. HHS should help DHS develop standards for screening and make sure that a trained child welfare professional is doing that screening to ensure that it only happens when it's absolutely necessary. When DHS sends a child to HHS, HHS must demand that DHS provide complete information about that child, and then HHS must always provide that information to the child's attorney or advocate. What happened to children under the family separation policy must never happen again. Intentionally harming children is not who we are as a country, and we must act now to ensure that we are protecting any child that comes to us asking for help. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Dr. Linton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman DeGette, Ranking Member Guthrie, and members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm Dr. Julie Linton, a practicing pediatrician in Greenville, South Carolina, where my clinical work is focused on the care of children and immigrant families. I'm the co-chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Immigrant Health Special Interest Group. On behalf of the American Academy of Pediatrics, or the AAP, and our 67,000 members, thank you for holding today's hearing. The AAP is nonpartisan and pro-children. Pediatricians care about the health and well-being of children, all children, no matter where they or their parent was born. As pediatricians, we know that children do best when they are together with their families. After reading media reports in March of 2017 that the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, was considering a policy that would separate immigrant mothers from their children upon arriving at the US border, we immediately spoke out against this proposed policy. We subsequently wrote to DHS 6 times to urge the agency to reject such a policy. The AAP also issued roughly half a dozen statements about why family separation devastates the most basic human relationship we know, that of parent and child. The AAP has repeatedly said that separating children from their parents contradicts everything we stand for as pediatricians, protecting and promoting children's health. Today, I will underscore the health effects of separation, both what we know from the scientific literature and what I know for caring for patients. Prolonged exposure to highly stressful situations, known as toxic stress, can disrupt a child's brain architecture and adversely impact short and long-term health. A critical role of a parent or known caregiver is to buffer this stress. Separation from a parent robs children of that buffer. Separated children can face immediate health problems, including physical symptoms like headaches and abdominal pain, changes in bodily functions such as eating, sleeping, and toileting, behavioral problems like anger, irritability, and aggression, and difficulty with learning and memory. Children who have been separated may also experience feelings of mistrust, embarrassment, guilt, or shame. In the long term, children who have been separated may be susceptible to chronic conditions such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, diabetes, or heart disease. I have seen the impact of family separation with my own eyes. In June of 2018, I cared for an 8-year-old boy that I will never forget. This boy and his pregnant mother fled violence and direct personal threats in Central America. Realizing that the zero tolerance policy was at that time in effect, I specifically and gently asked the boy and his mother if they had been separated at the border. With my question, a chilling silence arose. They both became tearful, and their angst was palpable. The boy shook, and his mother shuddered, whispering, 7 days. For 7 days, this boy and his pregnant mother did not know about the other's location or safety. This separation was shorter than many children harmed by the zero tolerance policy, but he still suffered the consequences. He could no longer sleep through the night. He had trouble being away from his mother for even short period of time, and his mother reported he was a shell of his previous self. Children are not little adults. To untrained eyes, they can appear quite healthy even when their systems begin to shut down. Tragically, this was the case for Jacqueline and Felipe while in the custody of Customs and Border Protection in December. We urge our federal agencies to apply a child-focused lens when considering policies that could have an impact on child health. The AAP remains committed to working with federal agencies to offer our expertise as medical providers for children in order to protect and promote child well-being. Additionally, children should not be placed in unlicensed facilities, whether they are run by HHS or DHS. The findings of the HHS Office of Inspector General about tornillo and family separation are troubling. We urge all relevant federal agencies to address these findings. It is critical that all reunified children receive appropriate medical care in the community to help them recover from the traumatic experience of separation from their families. Children and families who have faced trauma, with trauma-informed approaches and community support, can begin to heal. As a pediatrician, I know that first and foremost, we must treat all immigrant children and families seeking safe haven in the U.S. with dignity, compassion, and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Now, Dr. MUNIZ de la Pena, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts before the subcommittee related to the adverse health impact of family separation at the border. I'm CRISTINA MUNIZ de la Pena, licensed psychologist and director of mental health services at Terra Firma Immigrant Youth Clinic in New York City. I'm speaking today also on behalf of the American Psychological Association, or the APA. Terra Firma is a program designed to serve unaccompanied immigrant children and families since 2013. Over the past 6 months, however, Terra Firma has received increased requests for mental health services from foster care agencies and immigration attorneys caring for these children, as well as from the parents themselves who had been reunited with their children and are still struggling with the aftermath. My thoughts are drawn both from case examples from my therapeutic work with these children and from research findings. The traumatic impact of the separation of children in the border involves at least 2 different types of trauma. One is the acute trauma of the insensitive manner the separations were performed, and the other is the trauma from the length of the separation. The level of impact of these vary depending on crucial factors, such as the child's age and gender, developmental level, the level of harshness of the separation, the level of the length of the separation, the degree to which the child had communication with the parent during the separation, and the degree to which the child was informed and predictability was offered during the separation. Ample research tells us that unwanted and unexpected separation from parents may have severe consequences in a child's developmental processes and psychosocial functioning. When separated from their parents, high levels of anxiety and distress occur, which impair the developmental trajectories in otherwise healthy children. The following 2 examples illustrate some of the adverse circumstances and outcomes of parent-child separations. The youngest child seen in our program was a 2-year-old Honduran boy who had been separated from his mother while asleep and was kept away from her for 2 months. The mother had been told to leave the detention cell, and when she asked to wake her son up to take him with her, the officers told her to not bother because she was going to be right back. After 2 months of helpless wait, the mother was reunited with her son in New York. She came to our program asking for help, concerned about the then 3-year-old son, anxiety of separation, and persistent hypervigilance. During the sessions, the boy clung to his mother with fearful demeanor and had great difficulty relaxing and letting go to initiate the normal exploring behavior of a child his age. Another 4-year-old Salvadorian boy I evaluated, who appeared highly pleasant, engaged, and animated at first, would suddenly turn quiet, stare off, and become emotionally flat following each question about his father and the separation. During these episodes, the child appeared to struggle to return his attention to the present moment and re-engaged in conversation and play. These are clear symptoms of dissociation from the trauma of being snatched from his father without any explanation or opportunity to say goodbye. Research shows that the longer parents and children are separated, the greater the reported symptoms of anxiety and depression. According to the APA's Presidential Task Force on Immigration, sustained parental separation also predicts ongoing difficulty trusting adults and institutions, as well as reduced educational attainment. Attachment is the emotional bond that typically forms between infant and caregiver. In lay terms, attachment, love, and protection from a parent is to a child's mental health what water, oxygen, and food are for physical health. It is the means by which helpless infants get their primary needs met. It is also the needed platform of safety and comfort that allows for a child to explore, learn, and develop. As an example, the mother of the 2-year-old described earlier expressed feelings of profound anxiety and depression because she was terrified of connecting emotionally with her son, then being detained, causing him a second trauma of separation. As a result, she found herself keeping her emotional distance to protect her child from a second trauma of separation. And therefore, she was unable to provide the emotional safety and nurturing necessary for her son to feel safe, venture into the world, and develop. In sum, from my observations and well-documented research findings, attachment with the main caretaker must be protected and preserved. Meaningful access to trauma-informed mental health care is critical to ensure that both adult and child survivors of separation trauma heal. I would urge this committee to consider the serious mental health impact of parent-child separation on both children and parents, and put an end to the practice of family separation and help to ensure that immigrant children and their parents reunite and receive needed mental health care. Chairwoman, I would ask that the letter that the APA wrote to the president in June about family separation be included in the record, and I would be pleased to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Abbott, I'm pleased to recognize you for 5 minutes.
Chair DeGette, Ranking Member Guthrie, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for this opportunity to appear before the committee today so that I may share the impact that family separation had on the children Bethany serves and to propose solutions so that we as a nation may better care for children and their families who are seeking refuge. My hope is that the protection and care of children evokes a bipartisan response. Bethany partners with the Office of Refugee Resettlement, as well as Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services and the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops to meet the need of unaccompanied children. These children have fled from dictators, gang violence, sex and labor trafficking, starvation, and countries with the highest murder rates in the world. ORR does a good job of ensuring that children in transitional foster care have access to the services they need, including a safe temporary foster home, education, medical care, case management, mental health services, legal screening, and post-release services. As soon as children enter our care, we immediately begin the process of locating their families. Since 2013, Bethany has directly reunified more than 2,000 unaccompanied children with sponsors. Our mission always has been and always will be to quickly and safely reunify children with their families. During the implementation of the family separation policy, Bethany provided care for 108 separated children. Bethany staff worked diligently to identify the location of their parents and jointly with their parents, develop a reunification plan for every separated child in our care, as we do with every unaccompanied child in our care. Sadly, some children are still being separated from parents and caregivers at the border. While the reasons for continued separations are not often clear and continue to be concerning, it is never okay to take children from their families for the purpose of immigration enforcement. Children should never be used as a deterrent, leverage, or bait. Many more children could be better protected by giving ORR authority at the border. Under current law, CBP has 72 hours to determine if a child is fleeing to the United States as an unaccompanied child, with a parent or known guardian, or being trafficked. CBP is a law enforcement agency, and their agents are not trained in child welfare best practices. ORR social workers with a background in child protection could facilitate quick, adequate investigations and assist in making decisions about the appropriateness of separation. I would also like to address a major barrier to reunifying children with families. In May 2018, the Department of Homeland Security and HHS announced a memorandum of agreement mandating continuous information sharing on unaccompanied children, including their sponsors. We are no longer able to reassure a sponsor that claiming their children won't lead to their arrest and potential deportation to a country that they fled to escape violence and persecution. Sponsors are being forced to choose between the safety of their households and their children, a decision no parent should ever be forced to make. The MOA should be rescinded. As I was preparing this testimony, I was reminded of two sisters, 15 and 11, who were raised by their grandmother in Guatemala. Their mom lived in the US and regularly sent money back home so the girls could be fed, clothed, and go to school. It wasn't long before gang members started visiting their home and demanding protection money. The price for their protection eventually surpassed their ability to pay. Gang members beat grandma in front of the girls and promised to return for the girls if payment was not made in full. The girls fled. Bethany and ORR helped these girls find safety and then eventually their mother. Young girls should not have to live in fear of being raped and prostituted, especially when people in this great country can do something to help them. Like these two girls, every unaccompanied child is made in the image of God. Each of them mattered deeply to him, and each of them should matter to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Abbott. And batting cleanup, Dr. SHONKOFF, thank you so much for joining us. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair DeGette, Ranking Member Guthrie, members of the subcommittee, I want to thank you also for myself for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Jack SHONKOFF. I'm a professor of child health and development at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health and the Graduate School of Education, and professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School, and I direct the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. I'm a pediatrician by training, and my work is focused on early life influences on learning, behavior, and health. I took the liberty, I promise I will not exceed my time, but I cut 2 paragraphs out of my prepared remarks because they've been said by everybody who has spoken here this morning. So what I want to do is take a chance on using this opportunity to give you a deeper understanding of what the term toxic stress means. It's been mentioned a great deal. I'm going to give you a deeper understanding of that. And my testimony is based on strong scientific consensus from decades of scientific research. This is not about a single study, but it's the consensus of the scientific community. Sudden forcible separation of children from their parents is deeply traumatic for both the child and the parent. But above and beyond the distress we see on the outside, this triggers a massive biological stress response inside the child, which remains activated until the parent returns and provides some sense of comfort. Without exaggeration, there are literally thousands of studies that have converged on the following 2 simple, basic core scientific concepts. Number 1, a strong foundation for healthy development in young children requires a stable, responsive, and supportive relationship with at least one parent or primary caregiver. And the second concept is that high and persistent levels of stress activation, which is known as toxic stress, can disrupt the architecture of the developing brain and other biological systems, which I will say a little bit about in a moment, with serious negative impacts on learning, behavior, and lifelong physical and mental health, not just mental health. So early experiences are literally built into our brains and our bodies from the beginning. Stable and responsive relationships promote healthy brain development. They establish well-functioning immune and metabolic systems and cardiovascular systems, and they strengthen the building blocks of resilience. If these relationships are disrupted, young children are hit by the double whammy of a brain that is deprived of the positive stimulation it needs and is assaulted by a stress response that disrupts its developing circuits. When any of us feels threatened, our body's stress responses are activated. Heart rate and blood pressure go up. Stress hormone levels are elevated. Blood sugar rises, and inflammatory responses are mobilized. This is the fight or flight response. And every one of us knows what it feels like physically to be optimally stressed out. And I want to repeat that. The toxic stress response is what everybody here understands. When you are most stressed, you know what you feel physically. We all know what that feels. This response is automatic, and it's essential for survival. It is built into our biology, but it is designed to go back to normal when the threat is over. And if the sense of danger continues, the ongoing activation of the stress response system shifts from being protective and allowing us to deal with threat to becoming disrupted and outright damaging over time. For example, persistently elevated stress hormones can disrupt brain circuits that affect memory and the ability to focus attention and regulate behavior. Excessive inflammation and metabolic responses to stress in childhood increase the risk of heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, stroke, various forms of cancer, as well as depression and a vulnerability to addictions in the adult years. A number of people have alluded to this. It's not magic. We are opening up this black box. We are beginning to understand what is it about all of this constant stress that makes you more at risk for heart disease decades later. It's because the underlying biology is what is happening to these maturing systems. Unlike positive or tolerable stress, which can build resilience, excessive, prolonged toxic stress has lifelong consequences. So what I want to do is conclude by sharing with you how these scientific principles that I've just described provide a powerful framework for understanding the damage caused by the current family separation policy. All children who were abruptly separated from familiar caregivers at the border experienced overwhelming stress. Will some survive without significant problems? The answer is yes. Will many be seriously impaired for the rest of their lives? The answer again is yes. The biology of adversity suggests 3 factors that influence who is at greatest risk. The first is age. Younger children are the most vulnerable because their brain circuitry and other biological systems are relatively underdeveloped, and they are the most dependent on adult caregivers. The second is previous harm from adversity. Many people have alluded to this. The pileup of stress on children who are already compromised shifts the odds against them even further. Intentionally withholding the most powerful healing intervention we could possibly offer, the care of their parents when children are in danger, goes against everything that science tells us, everything. The third reason for variation in outcomes is the duration of separation, and that's the part that I want to leave you with. Toxic stress is a ticking clock, and prolonged separation inflicts increasingly greater harm as each week goes by. From a scientific perspective, the initial separation and the lack of rapid unification are both highly indefensible. Forcibly separating children from their parents is like setting a house on fire, and prolonging that separation is like blocking the first responders from doing their job. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you. On popular demand, we're going to recess the committee until the conclusion of this series of votes that we're about to have on the floor, but ask the witnesses to stay close because we will reconvene immediately after the conclusion of the